Selina Drovic thought she had found a dream when she married Damian Veylor, the handsome heir of a millionaire family. But behind the mansion's glittering walls, Margarethe Veylor's cold control, Adrian Veylor's unsettling presence, and Damian's fading charm hid a legacy of blood, secrets, and a ritual that would turn her fairy tale into a nightmare. Selina Drovic's life had always been ordinary, and for years she dreamed of a future where she could step beyond the limits of her small-town upbringing. She had grown up in a modest household, where financial struggles shaped every decision, where the simplest joys were considered luxuries. While others around her seemed content with their quiet lives, Selina longed for more. She wanted adventure, security, and a love that felt larger than life. When she met Damian Veylor, it seemed that all her dreams had arrived at once, neatly wrapped in a smile that promised a future far beyond her imagination. Damian was everything she thought she wanted: handsome, successful, and the kind of man who commanded attention the moment he entered a room. He belonged to a world Selina had only ever seen in glossy magazines, yet somehow he chose her. Their romance was swift, the kind that made others jealous and suspicious. In a matter of months, Selina found herself swept into his world of glittering wealth. The Veylor name was known across the country, tied to sprawling estates, exclusive parties, and businesses that seemed untouchable. To outsiders, they were a dynasty of success, a symbol of elegance and power. When Damian proposed, Selina barely hesitated. The thought of being part of such a powerful family felt surreal, and she believed she had finally found the kind of love story she had always craved. Their wedding was a spectacle, attended by society's elite, held in the gardens of the massive Veylor mansion. Cameras flashed, glasses clinked, and music floated through the night air. For Selina, it was the start of what she thought would be her happily ever after. Yet, beneath the perfection, small moments began to unsettle her. She remembered the first time she walked through the mansion as Damian's wife. The building itself was breathtaking, a structure of towering windows, marble floors, and chandeliers that sparkled like constellations. But the air carried an unshakable weight, as though the walls themselves held memories that refused to fade. She brushed the feeling aside at first, convincing herself it was only the intimidation of stepping into such grandeur. Still, a subtle sense of unease clung to her as she explored the rooms. The corridors seemed endless, stretching into darkness. Staff members moved silently, their eyes lowered, their steps deliberate, almost rehearsed. Margarethe Veylor, Damian's mother, was the first to remind Selina that this new life would not be simple. Regal and commanding, she carried herself like royalty, speaking little but watching everything. Selina could feel her mother-in-law's eyes assessing her, measuring her every move. Though Margarethe smiled politely at the wedding, Selina sensed the warmth was only for appearances. There was something colder beneath her gaze, something that made Selina's chest tighten. She tried to ignore it, reminding herself that all new brides struggled to fit into their husband's family. Still, it was difficult to shake the impression that Margarethe was not just protective of her son but guarding something else, something Selina could not yet understand. Damian, in those early weeks, seemed as devoted as ever, showering her with gifts and assurances of love. They dined in lavish halls, attended by staff who seemed almost invisible, and Selina wore dresses she had never dreamed she could afford. To anyone looking from the outside, she had won a life most women envied. Yet behind the polished smiles and glittering nights, cracks began to show. She noticed that certain rooms in the mansion were locked, their keys kept out of reach. Damian brushed it off with charming explanations, saying some places were under renovation or simply family storage. But the way his eyes hardened when she pressed the issue left her with an unsettled feeling. At night, when the mansion grew quiet, Selina often found herself lying awake, listening. The silence wasn't peaceful, it was heavy, broken occasionally by faint sounds, footsteps echoing from far-off halls, doors opening and closing when no one should be awake. Sometimes she thought she heard whispers, carried faintly through the vents, but whenever she asked Damian, he laughed and told her it was her imagination. Still, the unease grew stronger each day. Her friends envied her, believing she had found the perfect husband and the perfect life. On the surface it was everything she had ever wanted, but Selina couldn't ignore the strange tension in the house. It was as though she had stepped onto a stage where everyone was playing a role, and she had yet to learn her line. The dream she had wished for was slowly beginning to feel like something else entirely, something that carried shadows just beyond the glittering lights. And though she could not name it yet, Selina sensed she had married into a family with secrets far darker than she could imagine. Soon after the wedding celebrations faded and the guests returned to their lives, Selina's new reality began to settle in. The glamour of the mansion was still dazzling, but the routines within its walls grew increasingly strange. It became clear to her that this was not a household filled with warmth or laughter. Instead, it operated under strict control, almost like a silent machine, where every movement was calculated. At the center of this unspoken order was Margarethe Veylor. She dictated how the staff moved, what meals were prepared, even how Selina was expected to present herself at family gatherings. Every morning, Margarethe appeared in the grand dining hall at precisely the same time, her posture rigid, her words clear. Selina felt less like a new bride and more like a guest on probation, constantly being judged. Damian, who had once been attentive and charming, grew distant once the wedding glow dimmed. He often spent long hours locked away in his private study or traveling for business, leaving Selina to navigate the massive estate on her own. When they were together, his smiles seemed practiced, his gestures mechanical. The warmth that had drawn her to him felt dimmer with each passing day. He no longer looked at her the way he used to, and sometimes when she caught his gaze unexpectedly, there was an emptiness in his eyes that chilled her. It was as if she had married not just a man but a facade carefully crafted for the outside world. Adrian Veylor, Damian's younger brother, was the most unsettling presence of all. He rarely spoke, yet his silence felt louder than words. Selina often noticed him watching her from across the halls or lingering in the shadows of the mansion's endless corridor. Late at night, she would hear the faint creak of floorboards and catch glimpses of him wandering through the house. His movements were slow, deliberate, almost predatory. When their eyes met, his stare was unblinking, leaving Selina with the sense that he was studying her for reasons she could not comprehend. The staff never acknowledged him directly, and when Selina once asked about his habits, their faces grew pale as though she had mentioned something forbidden. The longer Selina stayed in the mansion, the more she noticed the presence of locked doors. There were wings of the house she was told not to enter, and though Damian's excuses seemed harmless enough, the strictness of the rules left her uneasy. She would sometimes see a servant carrying a tray of food toward one of the sealed corridors, slipping quickly inside before shutting the door behind them. The air around those places felt colder, the atmosphere heavier, as if the walls themselves were holding back something unspeakable. Selina began to wonder what the family was hiding and why so much of the estate remained closed off. What unsettled her most was the silence. Despite the mansion being filled with people, family, staff, visitors, the atmosphere remained unnaturally still. Conversations were brief and hushed, laughter was nearly non-existent, and even footsteps seemed deliberately quiet. It felt like a place designed to conceal rather than reveal. On the rare occasions when Selina left the estate for social functions, she was surprised by how free and normal the world outside felt. Returning home to the Veylor mansion was like stepping back into a shadowed cage where secrets pressed against the wall. The disquiet grew stronger as subtle patterns revealed themselves. Whenever Selina asked too many questions, Damian's charm would crack, his voice sharp with irritation. Margarethe's eyes, cold and commanding, seemed to warn her into silence. Adrian's watchful presence grew bolder, as if he was waiting for something only he understood. Selina began to feel like she was being tested in ways she couldn't see, like her every move was being measured against some invisible standard. At night, her dreams turned restless, filled with corridors that stretched endlessly, and doors she was never meant to open. She would wake with a pounding heart, convinced that someone had been standing outside her room. The glamour that had once blinded her was slipping away, replaced by a gnawing fear she couldn't ignore. The Veylors were not simply a powerful family, They were a family cloaked in mystery, their perfection carefully constructed to hide something far darker. Selina didn't know it yet, but she was already stepping deeper into a world where her life would no longer be her own, where every smile concealed a secret and every silence carried a warning. One evening, when the mansion was quiet and Damian was away on yet another trip, Selina's curiosity overcame her fear. For weeks she had been haunted by the image of the locked corridors, the ones that seemed to pulse with a secret life of their own. She had told herself not to pry, but the weight of unanswered questions pressed heavily on her. The silence of the house felt unbearable, and the unease that grew stronger each night had finally reached its breaking point. With the staff occupied in the kitchens and Margarethe resting in her private chamber, Selina decided to explore the forbidden side of the estate. She carried only a small candle and the memory of the narrow key she had once seen dangling from a servant's belt. Earlier that day she had slipped it quietly into her pocket when no one was looking, her hands trembling at the risk. Now, standing before a carved oak door, her heart thundered in her chest as she slid the key into the lock. The metal groaned softly, and with a reluctant click, the door gave way. What lay beyond felt like stepping into another world. The air was colder, heavier, filled with the scent of dust and age. A long corridor stretched out before her, lined with portraits she had never seen displayed elsewhere in the house. Each frame held the image of a woman, young, beautiful, but unfamiliar. Their eyes seemed to follow her, painted expressions caught somewhere between elegance and sorrow. None of their names appeared beneath the portraits, and Selina felt a chill creep up her spine as she realized these women bore a striking resemblance to herself. She tried to push the thought away, telling herself it was coincidence, yet deep down she knew the truth was darker. At the end of the hall she found a room that looked untouched by time. Inside, shelves were stacked with journals, their leather covers cracked and faded. Selina picked one up, brushing the dust from its surface, and began to read. The entries spoke of family traditions, of legacies built not only on wealth but on something else entirely, rituals, tests and sacrifices described in chilling detail. The language was obsessive, almost reverent, describing how the family's strength depended on their unity of blood, and the obedience of chosen brides. Each page drew her deeper into a world she didn't understand, a world that connected the family's fortune with practices too disturbing to accept. Tucked between the pages of one journal were clippings from newspapers, yellowed with age. They were articles about missing women, their faces hauntingly similar to those in the portraits outside. Some had vanished decades ago, others more recent, but all from areas near the Veylor estate. Police reports speculated about kidnappings or accidents, but none had ever been solved. Selina's hands shook as she realized these women were not strangers. They had been part of the Veylor story, and their lives had ended here, inside the very walls where she now lived. The weight of the discovery left her breathless, but something compelled her to keep searching. In a drawer she found personal belongings, lockets, rings, and scraps of fabric, each carefully preserved as though trophies of lives taken. Her stomach churned as the truth settled in. The Veylors had not only collected wealth, but had buried secrets of unimaginable cruelty. Selina stumbled back from the room, her candle flickering wildly in the draft. She felt as though the walls were closing in, as though the silence she had once feared was now filled with the voices of the women who had come before her. She had walked into the heart of the mansion's hidden past, and there was no denying it now. She was not just Damian's bride. She was part of a cycle that had destroyed countless others. Every instinct told her to leave, to run and never return. But she knew the danger was greater than she had imagined. The family did not simply keep secrets, they protected them ruthlessly. The thought chilled her as she crept back toward her wing of the mansion, clutching the stolen journal to her chest. She knew that if they discovered her intrusion, she would not be allowed to walk away. For the first time since stepping into the world of the Veylors, Selina understood she was trapped in something far larger than a marriage. She had uncovered the first layer of a darkness that stretched back generations, and it was only a matter of time before the family realized she knew the truth. Selina's discovery weighed on her like a shadow that refused to lift. Every time she saw Damian smile across the dinner table, or heard Margarethe's sharp commands echo through the halls, she could no longer separate their polished appearances from the terrible truths she had read in those journals. The portraits of the vanished women burned in her memory, and the clippings of their disappearances played over and over in her mind. She began to view the Veylors not as a family but as predators, bound together by something far darker than loyalty or wealth. The mansion which had once dazzled her, now felt like a cage built to hold secrets and sacrifices. Her unease turned to dread when she realized the journals were not describing rituals of the past, but ongoing practices. Some entries hinted at preparations for the new bride, cryptic lines about trials of loyalty, obedience and silence. Selina began to piece together the terrible pattern. Each woman who entered this family had not been welcomed as a daughter or wife, but had been chosen for something far more sinister. The locked rooms, the strange movements of the staff, the chilling way Adrian watched her, it all pointed to one horrifying truth. She was not merely Damian's wife, she was the next subject of the family's ritual. Damian's behavior only deepened her fear. At first she had thought his distance was nothing more than the stress of work, but now she saw the change for what it really was. His charm came and went like a mask he wore at will. Sometimes his eyes lingered on her in a way that made her skin crawl, as though he were studying her reactions, measuring her resilience. He no longer spoke of their future together, no longer promised her dreams of travel or children. Instead there was silence, punctuated only by Margarethe's watchful presence, and Adrian's constant lurking. Adrian grew bolder in his behavior. Selina would wake in the night to find her door slightly ajar, though she was certain she had locked it before bed. Once she heard heavy breathing just beyond the frame, and when she gathered the courage to look, she caught a glimpse of Adrian disappearing into the shadows of the corridor. His eyes gleamed with a knowledge she did not want to understand. She realized with terror that he was not only watching her but waiting, perhaps for the moment she would no longer be safe. The staff, once merely silent, now seemed fearful of her presence. They avoided her gaze entirely, rushing to complete their tasks without speaking a word. Selina wondered if they knew what had happened to the women before her. Perhaps they had been forced into complicity, trapped in the same cycle of obedience as the family itself. Every interaction left her with the same sinking feeling. She was utterly alone in a house where everyone else had already chosen sides. The truth of the ritual became undeniable when she overheard a hushed conversation late one night. Passing by the study, she caught fragments of voices, Damian's low and measured, Margarethe's sharp and commanding. They spoke of the offering, of maintaining the legacy, and of testing her spirit. Selina froze in the shadows, her pulse racing as she realized they were speaking about her. The family's wealth was not simply the product of clever business, but the result of something unholy, some practice of power that demanded the lives of those unfortunate enough to marry into their world. From that moment Selina knew she was living on borrowed time. Every smile from Damian, every cold glance from Margarethe, every step that echoed in the halls, it all carried a sinister weight. She began to move cautiously, memorizing the paths of the corridors, noting the routines of the staff, and keeping the stolen journal hidden beneath the loose floorboards of her room. Her survival depended on staying one step ahead, but she feared it was already too late. The mansion's silence now seemed alive with menace, and every night felt like the countdown to something inevitable. Selina understood the dark truth she could no longer escape. She had married into a family that fed its power through blood, and she had been chosen as the next sacrifice. The night Selina decided to act was one drenched in storm clouds and thunder. The mansion shook beneath the pounding rain, and the air felt charged with an electricity that mirrored her fear. For days she had lived in silence, carrying the weight of her discovery in her chest, every hour reminding her she was closer to whatever ritual the Veylors had prepared. She could not allow herself to be the next name hidden in the family's journal. With trembling hands she gathered the journal she had stolen and slipped into the darkened halls, her footsteps soft against the marble floors. The storm outside masked her movement,
but her heart beat so loudly she feared the whole house could hear. She moved carefully, knowing the family's routines. Damian was away in his study, Margarethe remained in her private wing, and Adrian, most unsettling of all, was somewhere in the shadows. Selina had planned this escape meticulously, memorizing the layout of the estate and timing her path to the back gate. She carried nothing but the journal, believing it was the only proof that could save her. As she reached the grand hall, lightning illuminated the portraits of the women she had seen before, their painted eyes glimmering in the sudden flash. It felt like they were urging her onward, their silent stares heavy with warning and sorrow. But freedom was not easily given. Halfway through the corridors she heard the creak of footsteps behind her. She froze, holding her breath before realizing Adrian was there, his figure looming in the flickering candlelight. His expression was blank, almost expressionless, yet his eyes glowed with something terrifying. For a moment Selina thought her escape had ended before it began, but when the storm thundered louder, she bolted, her footsteps echoing against the stone floors. Adrian's shadow followed, quick and deliberate, chasing her through the twisting hallway. Selina managed to slip through a side passage, and into the servants' stairwell, clutching the journal tightly. As she descended, the storm's howls grew louder, shaking the old house, as though nature itself wanted the secrets buried within to be exposed. She ran across the courtyard, mud soaking her shoes, until she reached the iron gates at the edge of the estate. With shaking hands she forced them open just wide enough to squeeze through. For the first time in weeks she was outside the suffocating walls, the cold air filling her lungs like freedom. In the nearby village, drenched and breathless, Selina burst into the local police station. The officers at first struggled to believe her wild claims, but Detective Rowan Hale saw the terror in her eyes, and the journal clutched in her hands. The entries, the newspaper clippings, the personal belongings, all were undeniable pieces of evidence. Hale quickly assembled a team, and before dawn, the Veylor mansion was surrounded. What investigators uncovered confirmed Selina's darkest fears. Hidden beneath the grand estate were chambers sealed away for decades. Inside were relics of the family's rituals, evidence of lives taken, and belongings from the missing women. The journals Selina had discovered were only part of the horror. Entire archives of the Veylor's twisted legacy were found, spanning generations. Damian, Margarethe, and Adrian were taken into custody, their empire collapsing overnight. Their wealth and influence, built on a foundation of cruelty and blood, could no longer shield them from justice. For Selina, survival came with scars. The world saw her as the woman who exposed one of the darkest secrets hidden behind the facade of wealth. But she carried the weight of knowing how close she had come to becoming another portrait in the hall. Though she had escaped, the memories of the mansion never left her, the silence of its corridors, the chilling stares of its inhabitants, the oppressive weight of secrets that nearly consumed her. Her story became a warning whispered beyond the village, and across the country, that sometimes the most glamorous lives hide the deepest shadows. Selina had once believed she was stepping into a fairy tale, but her marriage into the Veylor family revealed a truth darker than any nightmare. And though she had escaped, she knew the echoes of that house, and the women who had come before her would haunt her forever.